In 1964, Lyndon Johnson won by unprecedented amounts. Humphrey was our vice president. We had a Congress, I think we had 68 Democrats in the first Senate I attended. And the Republican side of the Senate looked like some deserted mining camp. But in 68, I mean, that was real poison. War was the catalyst that blew the whole thing apart.
You got those casualties' names? All right, give them to. Give them to. Next.
We'll get them tonight, sir.
We'll get them tonight.
I'm going to continue to oppose that abominable, evil, unjust war in Vietnam.
I have lived daily and nightly with the cost of this war.
Today, we have 550,000 men in Vietnam with over 100,000 boys killed and wounded, and we're told we're winning the war.
I want everybody to shut up about what happened.
I had once gone to Vietnam as a young senator, and I went around that country for a week, talked to some of the soldiers and some of the generals on the side, and I came back with a much more sobered idea about Vietnam. From then on out, I had my doubts. There were all kinds of, let's say, dishonest things being said to the American people about how this war was going, the body counts and so on. And suddenly along comes the Tet Offensive, and this enemy that's supposed to be disappearing is able to do this sort of thing. As the death count rose in Vietnam, that issue really stirred up not just Minnesotans, but Americans, stirred up college campuses. And I would go to meetings and I would get cornered by parents and so on. And they wanted this stopped. And it was their son, and they wanted it over. And they were not kidding.
There's got to be a better way than death, double talk, and taxes. On March 12th, stand up with McCarthy and say so.
He found a way to oppose the war, and as he said it, he also hoped to restore some public trust in the American political system. And he did. I mean, this was a very courageous act. And while he didn't carry New Hampshire, he missed just by a sliver. And by the time he got out to the Wisconsin primary, polls showed him ahead 3-4 to 1, and Johnson was going to be humiliated.
Your next president, Senator Robert F. Kennedy.
And what I believe that means is a new effort with new leadership to end the conflict in Vietnam.
Bobby Kennedy was a gifted, driven man, full of compassion, devoted to the problems of the poor, the disadvantaged, the minorities. You know, I sat alongside him for some years, a friend of mine, and yet some days I felt I didn't know him. He'd get into these moods. He was somewhere else. He was there, but his mind was somewhere else.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
I was on a NBC news program. We were watching Lyndon speak, and then we were going to come on and talk about it. And of course, Lyndon gives his speech, and right at the end he announces he's not running, and he's quitting, he's leaving, and then the cameras turn on us. And I didn't know what to do, so I said, well, I think Hubert should run. So I got started right there.
I shall seek the nomination of the Democratic Party.
Wonderfully warm, human, brilliant, empathetic, inspiring public leader, undoubtedly the most effective, impressive leader in Minnesota's history, in my opinion.
It wasn't a black man that killed King. It was a white man.
Senator Kennedy has been shot. Is that possible? Get the gun. Get the gun. Get the gun.
You know, it's now been Martin Luther King, John Kennedy, now Bobby. It just seemed like we'd lost our center as Americans. And the bloodshed, and all of them heroes, martyrs, people that stood for big things that America needed, all came to a head at the Chicago Convention. I was in the Senate, but I was also co-chair of United Democrats for Humphrey, and we were heading up a national effort to persuade delegates to vote for Humphrey.
The issue is whether or not the Democratic Convention is going to vote today to continue to kill American boys in South Vietnam. We can't possibly justify this killing of our boys. We've got to have a change in policy.
Do you think this convention is stacked for Humphrey?
It's stacked for, as some of our young people might say, for the establishment.
Do you think there'll be any protest on the floor if that should turn out?
A lot of anger about the way delegates were picked, minorities, women, new Americans weren't successfully there. This led slowly to a bunch of fundamental reforms of the Democratic Party that did really change the openness, the representativeness, and the elimination of bias in the Democratic Party, which is one of the reasons we have the president we have today. With Hubert's approval, I tried very hard to work out a compromise peace plank for the National Convention's platform, but the White House went nuts and basically took the compromise away from us, demanded that the convention vote up or down on Johnson's war, and it just helped rip it apart.
The police are walking forward with rifles and clubs out. They are moving over with gas masks. The area is completely lighted up. Some of the demonstrators ran back into the park with a few sticks. The police are now moving across in a rank, shooting tear gas.
I remember taking off from Saigon, and the guns are going off, and you can see campfires all over the place, and I said, wow, I'm glad to get out of here. And when I left Chicago at the end of that convention, I felt it's the same way. There were fires around, people battling, anger, oh man. And of course it led to that long, perilous campaign. I'm sure it led to Hubert's defeat, although he almost made it. It led to a deeply divided party that spent maybe the next decade trying to sort it out. One of my dearest friends in public life was Gaylord Nelson from Wisconsin, now gone, but he was the saint of the environmental movement. He came up to me when I was brand new senator. He said, I'm trying to introduce this bill to save the St. Croix River and pass this National Wild Rivers, Scenic Rivers legislation. He said, would you co-sponsor? I said, absolutely, let's go. Because I knew about that river. I loved that river, I love it now. If we hadn't passed that law, and we did, that river could have well become like so many of the rivers in the East that just become dumping grounds for pollution and junk and commercial developments that are discordant with what should be the mood of the river. We got a house now out there. And I love hearing the clank of canoes. Kids, the oars, the paddles touch the side of the canoe, and you can hear it up the river. And they're so happy going down that river. And it's so quiet and so lovely. Man, it's good stuff.